Kia ora koutou. For those of you not from Cerebral Fix, my name is MB. So I'm stoked to be here today to talk about what I've termed the paper and glitter glue toolbox, learnings for game production from over a decade in arts and non-profit organisations. Working in the non-profit sector has meant I've spent a lot of time getting super wily about how to create strategies and events that work for a community with a budget of just craft supplies, social media, sometimes wine, and relentless optimism. I'm going to start off with a bit of a whakawhanaungatanga, sharing a little bit about who I am and where I've come from, and what my history in the non-profit sector was before moving into games. That's me. I'm Tauiwi, an immigrant to Aotearoa. My whakapapa goes back to basically Scottish-Irish people who moved every generation. I was born in South Africa, did most of my growing up in Rotorua, studied at the University of Waikato in Hamilton before moving back to Rotorua. From a family of 6, I've got 3 older brothers. No wonder I turned out to be a producer. My family's close, loud, fun, chatty, and everybody else is on the North Island. We grew up playing Prince of Persia and Funny Face on DOS. Mind Maze on Encarta 95, had an increasingly competitive house rules for everything we played. And games were always a family time where it was sometimes happy and most likely arguing about whose turn it was. I am tangata tiriti and seek to uphold te tiriti o Waitangi, toi tū te tiriti. If I view my life as a game, family is a core pillar. It's basically what this slide is about. And then we moved on. In 2019-2020, quite a lot happened. I got a little bit sick. My mum got incredibly sick. The world went through COVID. We went through COVID. At mahi at work, it really impacted the communities we worked with and the way that we did work, but it wasn't all bad. These geese attended my wedding with my husband, Danny, and once the dust of these couple of years settled, we made a decision to move down south to Ōtautahi in 2021. I didn't set out to work in games. I started off working in youth and community development while I studied. Although as I approached the end of my studies, sweeping cuts across the country to community development made finding a job really difficult. Thanks, Bill English. I then worked in corporate communication, which is what I studied, public relations, and enjoyed the work, but it really didn't light my fire. In 2012, I started volunteering and working for an organisation called the Arts Village. It's this one. The Arts Village is a non-profit arts-based community space in Rotorua, comprised of 3 historic buildings, 2 galleries, a pottery studio. It was and continues to be a much-loved community taonga. I loved my mahi there. I started off doing admin, then I became the acting general manager, then the permanent general manager, and finally director of the organisation. During my time there, I also took a research sabbatical in 2017, visiting arts and community spaces across Aotearoa, Japan, and South Africa to research and understand commonalities, opportunities, and challenges. There were some really great ones, some validations, some things that were super in common, and also challenges we just don't have here. I went to do a research interview at the Johannesburg Art Gallery, which couldn't happen because somebody stole their roof. Which was really different. I then worked as general manager. In 2021, I got a little tapped out of things in my basket that I could add to the organisation. And after that 2019-2020 year, Danny and I decided to move down to Ōtautahi, where I worked as general manager for the Canterbury's Therapeutic Choir Charitable Trust, working alongside trustees and therapists to deliver therapeutic choirs for those with neurological conditions such as Parkinson's, stroke, TBI. And by the time I left this role, we'd grown from 1 to 3 choirs. We had a second neurological choir and a 3rd choir for those with dementia. It's an amazing organisation with amazing people, and I did take the opportunity to finish up last year after a couple of years, but I really sing the praises of their wonderful work. This is the Arts Village. The mission we set was for Rotorua to be a vibrant, creative community where everybody who wanted to participate in the arts can. a kaupapa boiled down by my friend and mentor Ingrid Snyman to basically a fundamental belief that art makes life good, which has a great connection to games. For our non-profit, participation was a big driver in an area that we grew. Participation was planned and delivered in programs for those in our regions to create, to learn, share, see and feel, and do. The organisational structure was a board of 10 trustees who met monthly. They employed me, I employed our team. I grew up kind of quiet, introverted, and never really sought leadership, and my time at the village was a real period of growth and learning for me. It was also really empowering, and I had just a dream team of the very best people possible, and we got to do some really cool things, which I'll tell you about briefly. I won't go into detail in any of these images, but I thought I'd include them as it's a great example of how we just got by on stationery with no InDesign license. We were really proud of the strategic plan. It was the last one I was there for, from 2018 to 2021. We ran focus groups, hui, breakfast meetings, online sessions, exhibitions, crafternoons, and more to get more than 3,000 individual inputs into our plan. The council that year, I think, got 28, so we were doing pretty well. When I started as general manager, we had around 18,000 people locally through our programs each year and a team of 4 people. At our peak, we had, the year before COVID, we had over 32,000 people through our space every year. We had a team of 10 staff, 200 volunteers, and 35 community groups from beekeeping to astronomy. We set targets and we really smashed them in funding, event numbers, exhibiting artists, sales, improving our building, opening a cafe, fixed asset purchases, and in 2019 we ran a really cool business award from our local chamber. It was a pretty cool team. Our experiences through COVID are probably for another talk at a different conference, but the team worked with local funders and community partners to pivot, to change our programs, to focus on well-being and support those online, those isolated, and parts of our community who were just doing it much tougher than others. And here's the thing about working here. We had to be really plucky. It's kind of what the talk is about. We once ran a nighttime festival during winter with a $250 budget, and we had more than 2,000 people through the building. It was chaos, but it was awesome. So non-profit as a skill set is not about being able to run an organisation with nothing, although honestly sometimes that was the space we were in. It's about setting and delivering a professional business plan, incredibly strategically, keeping enough money coming in to hit your goals. It's managing an annual budget to not make a profit but to leave surplus, to be able to set strategic long-term goals around assets or financial security and planning. And my last note on the Arts Village is that it's got a really long history. It was started in the 1980s, led by community, and it's going to continue long into the future. My time there was super foundational to me, and we had a lot of success, but also it's just a small part of a much larger journey that's owned by the community there. I wanted to tautoko their work, past, present, future. The pathway into games has been surprising, challenging, and delightful. Here are a few of the reasons I love it. One, outside of work, I am an artist, not in the sense of game artist, but I paint. That's one of my paintings. I've got a special interest in accessibility. In both of my last roles, I worked with Arts Access Aotearoa. If you're not aware of their work, they are an amazing group to engage with. They provide an organisational self-audit assessment tool. And accessibility in games is an area of technical knowledge that holds a lot of value for both game developers and gamers themselves. And lastly, I was excited to work in games because I love games, especially board games, but also anything cozy, narrative-driven, full of explorations, and not full of guns. Within games, production really appealed to me. The best way to describe the personality of a producer, I think, is being the youngest sibling to 3 older brothers. It's being the person in your family who makes sure everybody remembers birthdays and brings what they said they would bring to family Christmas so that you don't end up with 5 hot chickens and a bag of coleslaw, which is what happened the year that I was not there. I applied for an advertised role and started interviewing with Cerebral Fix in 2021, and I didn't get the job. But when another role became available in 2022, I was successful. My husband is a developer there, which meant I had a good understanding of the culture and values. And if you haven't heard of us, Cerebral Fix is a company based in Otatahi, Christchurch. We make games, we make experiences. Our team are the most phenomenally talented, creative and technical experts. Please talk to me or any of us if you want to know more. During my time at Cerebral Fix, I have been able to apply some of the learnings and wins from my times in non-profit, particularly at the Arts Village. It's really easy to dismiss the non-profit world as being mostly about philanthropy and charity, but I would argue that skills the non-profit sector develops are highly tuned people management and business skills to enable working super efficiently and maximising every possible resource. Non-profit thinking develops your ability to tell accurate and impactful stories about the work you do, which is highly valuable when you're thinking about risk, reward, positioning, and markets. I'm going to go through 5 areas now with the hope that some of these learnings or approaches might be useful to you, whatever your role is in game dev. Toolset number 1 is about empathy, practical ways to apply empathy with your team. I like to think of empathy as how we understand and relate to one another. In a professional capacity, empathy gives you better results from those you work with by creating understanding, compassion, and connection. An empathetic workplace is often a high-performing team where people don't stew on unsaid things and small stuff just doesn't blow up as easily. I have a story about jazz. I can only see half of it on the screen, so I'm going to ad-lib some of it, but it's going to be totally fine. So, jazz. I was out shopping at the warehouse a few years ago, and they had a massive sale on jazz. I wanted to move all of my pantry storage from plastic into glass, and so I bought heaps of jazz, like 30 jazz, different sizes, tiny ones, big ones. I took them out to the car and loaded them in and thought, yep, that'll do. As soon as I started to drive, the jars started to clink against each other, and I could just hear this terrifying sound of 30 jars in the back of my car threatening to break. And I was driving super tentatively. I mean, I drive like a little old lady anyway, so it wasn't that much slower. But I was trying to turn really smooth, and there's all of these speed bumps and roundabouts if you've driven through central Rotorua. And it wasn't my best driving. I was just driving very cautiously because I was really aware I didn't want to break my jars in the back. Eventually I got home, but the experience really stuck with me, because every time I was driving and I'd get frustrated with another driver, I would soothe myself by thinking, oh, they've just got jars in the back. And as soon as I thought that, it unlocked my ability to have empathy for them and just kind of get over it and move past. Jars in the back has become also a way to think about people in life. It's really easy to get stressed out, frustrated, or challenged by other people. But when I am, I try to remind myself that people have jars. They might have jars in the back, and I can't see what they are, but they're impacting their choices and behaviour, and it's probably nothing about me. I'm just going to go back, if I can. And this is the bit I need to ad-lib. The important thing about jars is that you don't need to know what other people's jars are to be able to apply empathy to them. They might be bad stuff, sad stuff, they might just be chaos or other stuff they're juggling in their lives. And the key for me in talking about jars is that you really don't need to know what their jars are to be able to handle them with empathy and acknowledge that everybody kind of has jars. Empathetic conversations are the next tool. I worked for a really long time trying to figure out how to have courageous conversations because I thought that's what I needed to do. I needed to be like really ballsy and have conversations with people to confront them when things weren't going well, because that's what a lot of leadership models taught me and a lot of really amazing, assertive people taught me. But I discovered actually that what I wanted to have were empathetic conversations. They became a key skill for conversations both with my team and with our funders and community partners. A note that empathetic conversations aren't every conversation. For me, it's something that I applied when there was something I wanted to resolve or a difference of opinion or an issue that we needed to work through. So once you've determined that you actually want to have an empathetic conversation, here's how to approach it. Even footing. No unnecessary hierarchy, be on the same level, sit at the same table, earnest, intent. Go beyond active listening by doing some active preparation, thinking about the other person, thinking about the wider situation and preparing yourself for the meeting, particularly to go in without having a fixed outcome that you're relying on, going in with an actual open mind for the kōrero. Sticking to your boundaries, being firm. Empathy isn't just a bonanza of applying soft skills. You're in a professional setting and you can just be quiet if you need to. You don't need to people please or feel pressured into saying or sharing more than you need to. You can finish the conversation up without it being nicely wrapped in a bow and still have mana for both of the people in it. And that kind of links to the next one of not feeling a need to fill the silence. Silence is kind of okay. And trying to sit with it and get used to it. Being transparent could actually go right at the front because it's about not using fancy words to sweeten what you want to say or to water it down. Being direct and getting to the point quickly so that you can use all of the valuable time with genuine intent to discuss it together. Empathetic conversations have solved a lot of problems for me and helped really adversarial positions filter down into a partnership to solve a problem together. Another way of applying empathy as a tool is to work with your team's strengths. Investigate languages of appreciation at work and use them. Our languages of appreciation are the sort of workplace appropriate love language framework. It's important to make your team feel seen and valued. And I used it when we wanted to call out a specific piece of mahi or an especially cool thing someone did. It's really useful to know how they work. I didn't know the first time I praised our finance manager that the absolute worst thing you can do to her is to stand in front of a room full of people, praise her and have them all look at her. Not her favourite form of appreciation. She really liked something one-on-one or a handwritten note. And knowing what your team members want and how they can feel appreciated and valued is something that can really uplift your team and make them feel not just valued but seen and like they belong to a workplace and belong. And it's a really good thing to include in your charter. Set narrative goals. I used to love doing this with my team. We would talk KPIs and performance targets, but we also always set a narrative goal, which is something that they're working on. It might be a strength area that they're wanting to grow and share, or it might be an area of weakness. And we would identify currently, I feel this about the situation. In 6 months, I would love to feel this about the situation. And they became really powerful goals to revisit with people. And then also informed the way that they talked about themselves in the role at work and as developing team members. Everyone has strengths and they are different for each of us. Investing time in understanding and having your team understand their individual strengths gives a lot of power to the way we work with each other. If you understand what your strength areas are, you can lean into them, but you can also guard against leaning into them too much. If you're a strategic, big picture person, you can sort of remember that sometimes it's nice to just take a minute and lean into your colleague who maybe is a details, data person. And it's just nice to be able to catch yourself and as a team build verbiage around how you can work together, acknowledging that everybody is equally valued with different skill sets that they're bringing to the pot. Setting the boundaries for strength-focused conversations is important. Understanding that people have strength areas that might also be different from their role, and there might be parts of their job that are not in their strength area that are an expectation you need to work through. And keeping clear boundaries about it. You're not providing a job just to lean into their strengths. It's also a job where they need to lean into their growth areas. To summarise the empathy toolset, people have jars. I cannot see the rest of the slide, but it's okay. People have jars. It's important to have empathetic conversations where you're going in actually open to coming out with a win for everybody, even if it's not one you've thought about yet. And understanding the strengths of your team are only going to grow the impact that you can make as a team together. Toolset number 2, community development as a lens for game development. As a producer, I really like thinking about our team and our studio as a community, all sorts of like weird and wonderful personalities, and you add your own weird and wonderfulness to it, and you can have shared goals and aims, and there's real benefits to belonging. Participatory models are something, it's often talked about in community research, participatory research, which theorises that the people most impacted should be really involved in the decision making. They shouldn't be really far away removed. Your team, your clients, partners are a neighbourhood. Everybody has their role to play, and it feels good to belong to a safe and supportive neighbourhood. At the very least, it feels good not to belong to a really messy neighbourhood. Everybody wants to understand how they fit in and have the opportunity to be heard, and you can get better results if you work when you're making plans or decisions with the people those plans or decisions impact. Bringing people in at the start of the solution lets you find it together, embeds ownership so everybody can take it forth. One key thing I want to stress is about where to apply this thinking. Not all decisions are participatory. The highest impact area for participatory problem solving is often any decision that will either impact a significant amount of people or have severe impacts. Let's talk about invitations. Oh, I did actually before. Jim Dyers is an amazing community participatory development worker. He's been in New Zealand, he's based in America and Canada, and I have some links at the end, I think. Invitations. This could be to a meeting, to an initiative, to a project, to a conversation. Make it fun. People are more likely to come to a party than an intervention. It's not about tricking people because that would not feel good. But keep in mind that you want people to be excited or engaged, and fun invitations are a really good way to get that. When you can, create invites that are fun and specific. Even a retro, think about the language you're using to get people to have buy-in, to come in to something they can actually be excited about coming to. Remembering not everything is a party, and that's okay. Invite people with purpose, who needs to be there and whose voices are key. It's easy to accidentally overpopulate an invitation and go too broad when you actually just want a few specific people there, or you want a few specific people to be able to talk candidly and freely. I'd really recommend a book by Priya Parker called The Art of Gathering, which talks about generous exclusion, which is the intentional drawing of a temporary line for the good of the guests and to help activate and fulfill a gathering's purpose. It's not permanent, but it focuses on the meeting purpose itself and not politics. And if you happen to work with me, I have a copy I can lend you. When you don't have power to influence someone to come to your meeting, know that sometimes they do just need to be invited more than once to show up. Don't take it personally if they don't. Even if something's a burning priority from you, it might be low for them. Don't hold a grudge. Ask them next time. People might need to be invited in. Not everybody feels like they have a place at the table. Intersectional identity at work is a really great example of that. People feel a really different level of entitlement to space based on all of the social constructs we're brought up with. People might need to be invited, so invite in. People might have had a really bad experience that you're not aware of. People need to be invited back. Just another plug for Priya's book. It's a really fantastic resource. Community partners, what are they? How does it relate to game dev? Community partners are anybody you work with or have a relationship that isn't your team. You're not on the same team, but you have shared co-papa goals. It might be your neighbours, it might be your clients, it might be co-developers or just other studios you have connections to. You have a shared gain to make if things work well. They're often something you have informally, but I found a lot of benefit to having a specific corridor on it, so that community partnership is mutually agreed and mutually upheld. Something that's documented, whether it's something casual, like having a cute little squad name for yourselves when you meet up together, or something more formal like an MOU or Memorandum of Understanding. Community partnership should be revisited, could be weekly, monthly, quarterly, a sync or a chat specifically to discuss your shared goals in community partnership. You're in each other's corner. And to summarise this whole community development lens toolset, number one, involve those impacted by a decision in the making of that decision, especially for big stuff. Two, be thoughtful about the purpose of a meeting or gathering and how and who you ask others to be there. And 3, build partnerships that have meaning and feel valuable for both parties. Number 3, almost there. Using non-toxic hustle to manage team burnout. Before I go forward, I'm going to address 2 parts of that sentence. Non-toxic hustle. I don't mean hustle as in crunch, and I don't mean like an MLM hustle grind culture. Non-toxic hustle is recognizing that sometimes as a team you are at all systems go to get the job done. Team burnout. Burnout's a risk in non-profit. It's a huge risk in the arts and non-profit sectors. Mostly because of passion. A lot of people are there because they're so passionate about the area they're working in that it's more than a job, and it's really easy to over-contribute when you're at that point. Passion is not the burnout, and passion is not the only reason for burnout, but when people really care about the thing they're working on, it's just so easy to work beyond your means or expectations. So how do you set a balanced culture where people can safely get a waggle on to get the work done when needed, but that doesn't venture too far? These are some of the things we used that I found really successful. Make it okay to need to have a break or take a moment. It's okay to have a day off, and it's okay to have an off day. Sometimes there's people on your team who are going to need that permission who won't do it unless it becomes part of your language. Step away from celebrating martyrdom. Don't talk about how great the work you did till 4 a.m. was in a way that glorifies it. People having to martyr themselves in that way for work is a sign that something is going wrong, and it should be resolved and not lauded. Don't get complacent about the difference between passion and energy. Passion can be really boundless, but energy is finite and it runs out. And also if you're paying people, you're paying for a specific amount of that energy. Establish language for your team on stress and burnout conversations and make it really easy to check in with each other. We used to say, we're not a hospital. And I've often thought about that my advice would be really terrible in an actual hospital because you can't say that. But I think in a game dev situation you can. And I would venture to say this can be really helpful. Very few things we do as game developers will ever be life or death situations. And then I guess, what do you do if you're worried about people taking advantage? Have really clear and candid and direct conversations with people as early as you can. Don't let it linger in the hope that they'll gently pick it up or realise themselves. It's rarely that people are actively trying to take advantage of a generous system. Sometimes it's just junior team members figuring out what professional workplace settings look like. Have empathy, but remember you are co-workers, you're not family. There is an expectation for people to be productive and professional, and a balanced culture is just that. Leaning too far either side is really damaging. Well-being. Well-being looks different to everyone. Have a conversation with your team about what it looks like for them and sort of define that together. Get crafty with your budget. No or low budget is not an excuse. No time, also not an excuse. As an example, these are really dorky, but I used to do them every quarter because it didn't cost us anything extra and it was something our team really valued. They could take an hour of their time at the start or end of a day, which was really important for us because we needed to consistently have somebody to lock the doors and answer the phones. We didn't need to know how they were taking that time, but it was time they could take just to do something for them. The first time didn't really work because I didn't issue myself a voucher and my team were really mad about it. So if you try this, make sure everybody participates. Don't leave it to HR producers. In game dev, empower well-being on multiple levels. Each team member has a responsibility to their own well-being and their impact on the well-being of others. You're not going to do a perfect job every time. Seek feedback, adjust, learn, adapt, move on. We all love a roadmap, but what if you thought about not just what is happening and when it's delivered, not just milestones and release cadences, but what about what that period of work looks like? When is your team the busiest? When is each department under the most pressure? How much of their time is actually within a time pressure period? We found that without planning, it was really easy for us to accidentally program 12 months where our team had to be 100% full throttle all the time. And at that point, it becomes really easy to move beyond hustling together to a deadline into a really dangerous zone where people are burning out and pushing themselves too far. So we talked about it as flex work periods, making sure when we looked at our schedule, we were identifying high stress times and making sure that there were also low stress times. For us, it often was asynchronous, so when one of us was having a really high demand workload, other people would crowd around them and support. And if it was all of us, we would schedule stuff in. We would close the building for a day. At the end of the year, we used to shut the building halfway through the day and all go pick blueberries, which we did once because we were so eternally stressed, and then we did it for 8 more years because it was such an important part of our team's identities, even though they were a non-profit, even though they were working in a job full of passion but not necessarily great remuneration. It's something that made them feel good. Debrief. Not every idea, project or sprint is a winner, and what happens if we never talk about it? This picture's a really silly example, but I was very proud of some work I did on submission work for a show that we held every year called the 200 Show. And it was only at a debrief that someone was like, hey, you copied our butcher. Retros are a really great Scrum tool for looking at a specific piece of time. But the value of a good debrief is that you can hone in on a specific task, event, document, brand identity, and assess with some speed and decisiveness what could be different to improve it, or do you even need it. Ad hoc, but important, debriefs ensure that everybody gets a chance to have their say. The one important thing is, even though they're ad hoc, make sure you agree ahead of time who's going to be showing up, who's going to be leading the corridor, who's going to be taking the notes. Could be super structured. You might have a slideshow you're taking them through. It could be really casual. You might sit around with a cup of tea. Depends on your team, how much trust they have, what their ways of working are. But if it's a new team or there's stresses or clashing, you're going to need more structure to enable that people can shift out of a defensive space to a proactive one. So to summarise this little cache of community development lens stuff, excuse me, I'm just going to have some water. Is to craft a balanced work culture and make sure it's actually balanced. Do what you can to make your team's lives good. You're all going to be happier for it. Plan the way you work and don't pretend that busy times don't exist. And debrief specific events or processes to actually understand and make progress on improving them. Toolset number 4 is safe spaces for uncomfortable conversations. This was something that we tried to actively work on, and I'll talk a little bit more about them, but I wanted to give you a specific story of a bit of learning for me around this. So we ran a school holiday program. Each school holidays would have 5 to 7-year-olds and 8 to 12-year-olds, and about 40 of them in the building at once, and it was total chaos. And one day we had a really multicultural, diverse staff, and one day we had a parent come in who was atrociously racist to a very dear, valued member of our team. I worked upstairs and I could hear her from upstairs, so I came down and I checked in. What we did was quickly my other co-worker took her back to our project office so that she was safe and not having to deal with the lady. I dealt with the lady, we trespassed her off the property. But afterwards we had a debrief because it was just important to recognise each individual's part of that process and whether there's anything we could have done to uplift and uphold our team members' mana more. And it was really interesting. Because we were able to have a safe conversation about it, even though it was kind of uncomfortable, we talked through what we did and what we could have done differently. And she said, hey, actually, it was so good to be removed from the situation, but also it kind of made it seem like that lady was right. She didn't want to have to deal with me, and then she had to deal with me. And then she didn't have to deal with me. And what would have made her feel better is if we'd supported her to deal with the lady and trespass her out of the building and kept the power for her. And it was a really good learning about how even really good intentions can go awry and disempower the people you're really trying to protect. You don't get to those learnings if you can't make safe ways to have those slightly uncomfortable conversations where somebody who's a junior employee can say, actually, look, I know you tried, but that wasn't that great for me. So that's kind of what informs this section. So we used to talk about uncomfortable conversations at work and setting a safe scene for them. What is an uncomfortable conversation? It could be a conversation about feedback, something going poorly, something sensitive and work-related. Some conversations, it's good to recognise, should just be had with HR, but having safe ways to talk about the ways we work together, even if they're going to change or challenge the way we do things, can really improve what we do. Who is it uncomfortable for? Usually everybody, honestly, but ideally it should be the person in power who is the most uncomfortable, because they have the power to help set the scene and make it okay. And is it okay to feel discomfort? Yeah, totally. As long as it's consenting and that people are not in disparate power levels where one person just doesn't get to have a say and they are uncomfortable because they are being imposed upon. Uncomfortable conversations, sometimes you're uncomfortable just because it's a sign of change or growth, which is needed. Who can make the conversation safe? Everybody participating, get consent, offer support, and have transparency with how you hold it and where any information from it goes. Step away from ownership. Consider the power dynamics. Who owns the power? Who called the meeting? Actions should have owners, but not every meeting needs actions. Sometimes you might stop before you have actions and give people time and space to reflect, to maybe ask other people for support and advice. Give those complex conversations time to breathe. Don't rush to agreement or resolution if it isn't happening naturally. And open questions will help the solution to actually be an open approach. These types of conversations really benefit from transparency. I recommend sharing the actions. They don't have to be all in one place. I recommend sharing the actions in terms of them not sitting on one person's list. Let others benefit from growth too. Be willing to learn and be ready to be wrong, and know which things you can accurately assess, which is your perspective, your context, and how you are feeling. Remember that other people have jars. They have their own context. They have their own lives outside of the time you see them. It's not a laundry list. An uncomfortable conversation should be centered. It shouldn't be a place where every grievance, problem or thought comes up. What is the purpose? And has everybody having the conversation agreed to be there? And those two things will do a lot of the work for you. What is the context of your organisation, team roles? Think about power dynamics. Are you 3 people where 2 people are in leadership and 1 person is a junior staff member? That might need some help to invite somebody else along to address the dynamic. So to summarise, safe spaces for uncomfortable conversations are these 4 things. Uncomfortable conversations are powerful in the right setting, but don't force it. Think about who owns the power, who owns the actions, and it's okay to name discomfort. We should all be ready to be uncomfortable sometimes. Keep it transparent. Don't have a hidden agenda. Come in prepared to change your view. And just address one thing, don't try cram heaps of stuff into the conversation, you'll muddy the focus. The last one's a little more simple. Task management, production, in any way I've worked, is always a huge task list, and for me, if something is not written down, I have the pressure of the idea that there's something undone, not written down, not addressed, and I find that super hard to switch off at the end of the day as well. So I use bullet journaling, an established system. There's a link at the end of this. You can tweak it with how you like, but I thought I'll talk to you about how I do it. Bullet journaling is a note system you can use to customize how you work. You can do it digitally. I use a notebook. You only write down tasks on it that you are responsible for. You take your list with you throughout your day. You add to it as things come up. You write down simple descriptions, just a word or 2, specific enough so you know what it is. You start with a dot for each item you add, and you refer to your list at times when you're planning or undertaking work. The start of your day, the end of your day, focus time, before you agree to take on any new work, so you've got a real good sense of what's already on your plate, and when you're reporting on what you've done, because it's really easy to forget all of the stuff you've actually been churning away through. So this is a key. I wasn't sure how it would look on the screen. But basically, you write things down with teeny tiny dots, and when you go to resolve them, this is what I do. If I look at my list and something's really important and I want to do it first, I add a little triangle, because it's a hazard. If I don't actually need to do an action, I just change it to a dash, that's a note. If I've managed to delegate it to somebody else, I do a backwards facing arrow. It was on my list, it's resolved, it's on somebody else's list. If I've completed it, I change the dot to a little cross. And if I've transferred it to my next list, I've done a forward facing arrow. And I strike it through if it's something that needs to get out of there. I maintain a working list. It's a central list of line items to resolve. It's regularly revisited. It's dated. It's no more than 1 page. It's easy to get to. It's easy to access. And if I've accidentally taken on 2 jobs, I have 1 per job. I don't combine them into one horrifying list. I close off my list at a time that suits me. On a Monday, I set up my list and I close out my list from the previous week. I also do it as needed if a page accidentally fills up, but I write really small so I can fit a lot of stuff in there. To close out the list, I resolve tasks by either completing them, hopefully delegating them to someone else if there's an opportunity, sometimes deprioritizing it and letting go of it as a task, as long as I'm telling anybody who's depending on me to do it that I've done that, or transferring it over to a new list. I transfer it by rewriting the task, or retyping it if it is something digital. I find it really important to rewrite it because it makes me clarify whether or not it's actually important enough to be on the list. Is it important? Is it urgent? There's a whole bunch of tasks that are not urgent or important on your list that you do need to do, so it's not that you delete them if they're not. To summarize bullet journaling, take timely notes, write them down accurately as they happen, resolve and manage each one as its own little line item, control them in one list, and review and maintain that list. That's the end. So in this talk I talked about applying empathy, running teams with community principles, planning in non-toxic hustle in a realistic way to avoid burnout, tackling tricky convos with care, and bullet journaling as task management. There are some links. I really recommend, I didn't talk about it, but the Museum 2.0 blog archive on the internet is a blog that's an amazing archive of participation and working for and by the communities that we live and work in. It's phenomenal, and The Art of Relevance is an amazing book. You can either buy it or download the PDF for free. I think that's it. Does anybody have any questions? Excellent, thank you so much. I will escape. No, there we go. Amazing.
I'm sorry, but I got a question. When you are in a leadership position, how do you deal when someone thinks that kindness can be weakness or lack of character?
Interesting. I've had this a lot. I mean, it'll shock you to know that people don't find me intimidating. I think just being really very direct. Also, if people challenge kindness or what they might perceive as being too altruistic, not to jump to respond, sometimes to leave them with the silence so they keep talking and they figure out themselves that actually it's a really awkward and terrible way to approach that. And sometimes just questioning back to them what they've said and asking them to explain it. Because in explaining it, they're only going to say something that justifies why that probably is not a great angle to take. I really think that within a business context, kindness and well-being and ways of working in a way that makes people feel good to be there is really doable and achievable. Yeah.
Thank you. You're awesome.
Cool. Excellent. I think that's time. Come talk to me if you'd like to. I tried to delete my Instagram out, but I forgot. There is nothing on there if you go on there. Thank you.